Welcome back to Weather or Not, always sponsored by TD Bank. I'm WABC Chief Meteorologist Lee Goldberg, and we started the year with some solo Weather or Nots, and you can always get my daily weather discussion there, a detailed discussion of the weather pattern in place, and we go into long range as well. But we wanted to jump back into the deeper dive Weather or Nots and kind of give you a state of where the winter is, where we're headed, how the pattern looks. Snow levels, are things kind of aligning, or is it more cold and dry? We'll get into all of that. Before we do that, we certainly want to get into the fire situation because we are recording this around the catastrophic fires that are going on in Southern California. We're going to address that as well. Lots of topics to tell you about, and I have a great guest, returning guest here to Weather or Not. It's meteorologist Stephen DiMartino from NYNJPA Weather, now certified digital meteorologist, continues to put the accolades on the resume. Welcome to Weather or Not again. Great to see you, and Happy New Year, Stephen.
Happy New Year. It's great to be back. Always a fun time talking with you.
Thanks. Appreciate it. So like I said, I wanted to start out with talking about these fires, which have literally incinerated the Pacific Palisades, and the setup, which, coming off of a very dry fall again in Southern California, but really a setup that unfortunately was a lethal alignment out there. So can you speak to what's going on out in the West?
Sure. Unfortunately, it's not surprising this is happening. This is part of their climatology. Literally, this type of climatology wiped out an entire civilization around 1200 AD. Unfortunately, whenever you get an upper level low diving towards the Bay of California, Baja California, around that whole area around northern Mexico, as we're seeing right now, it sets up perfect conditions to drive very strong winds right into portions of Southern California and really enhancing the potential for fire. And unfortunately, when you have a lot of people in that small area, it doesn't take much of a spark. It could be anything from just a power line getting knocked over to someone's cigarette butt to a bit of lightning. And unfortunately, it can burn down everything. Now, what really makes it really bad, much like what we saw in Hawaii, is that aside from you have all that dried timber and grass that's there, you have all the buildings, which is just perfect tinder to ignite the fire even worse. And then you funnel in that moving air, which increases your winds, and then the strong fires creates more uplift, enhances the winds even more, and that's how you end up with 100-mile-per-hour winds. And then with everything being dry, those cinders that are coming off the original fire ignite other locations and other buildings and trees, and it just feeds on itself until everything's burnt out.
Yeah,
it's unfortunate. What's really unfortunate is that, we know this is going to happen, and for whatever reason, I'm not sure why, but we don't prepare to at least have a water source in reserve to say, hey, let's get this when we know these situations are happening. It's not like this is happening out of the blue, but we've never seen it before. When we have these situations, when we have our major rainstorm events in California, where we have our atmospheric river driving in, hey, let's collect that water because we know that those droughts are coming. We know that these fires are coming. So not prevent it, because that's nearly impossible.
Sure.
But at least to blunt it and to reduce it and to have plans street by street to say, hey, look, let's make sure that all of our citizens have the amount of water that you need to prevent this situation.
It's an excellent point. Now, whether you're able to do that through, irrigation to disperse that water, because right now the bigger challenge is they can't attack this from the air because of the 80 to 100-mile-per-hour winds. That'll be abating a little bit later today. But that's a great point. And one of the big nuggets that Stephen talked about, it's not just that Four Corners high out west that's pushing those Santa Anas in. It's enhanced by this upper level low and low pressure at the surface too over the Baja. So yeah, that's a major player. So I wanted to kind of relate it to our fall fire season that we had here. Stephen, I was driving home one night. This is around midnight, and I'm driving up the Henry Hudson Parkway, and what startled me back in the fall was seeing the cliffs on the other side of the Hudson on fire, and then those classic fire lines snaking down not too far from the GWB. And I said, I don't remember in the nearly 30 years I've been here seeing New York City is such a close backdrop to these fires. And within a few days, we had the Inwood fires as well. So obviously, very dry fall. We've made some headway into the winter, although January, despite some nickel and diming snowfalls, not as wet. Are you at all concerned that the fire weather discussion is a frequent player in our weather discussion lineup? As you look at the rest of the winter heading into the spring, are you concerned that this is something that's more of a familiar topic we're going to be talking about?
Yeah, the fact that we're building more and more into areas that had nothing there, just regular tree lines and whatnot, is a concern. Now you have more people in these environments, so you increase the potential for enhancing those fires. Some people accidentally lighting those fires. You have more camping, and then you have drier conditions that we saw somewhat back in the 1980s, but not the same type of fire impacts. And of course, New York City does have a history, way back in the early 1900s of literally almost burning down in conjunction with a earthquake. So the potential for fires and massive fires it has always been there, but we are interacting with nature more and more,
Mm-hmm.
which, is typical. I mean, we're building more and more. Look at, I mean, just in Freehold alone, where I grew up, we start out with, where my house was nothing more than by itself, and we had literally a bull running around that we had to stay indoors in case it was running, in case it hit us. Now you have the Freehold Mall, you have the highways, you have buildings, you literally have whole developments being built up and down Route 9. And then you add that to the potential for a simple fire with dry conditions that could really grow, where you have more and more property being impacted. So unfortunately, I don't see this coming to an end anytime soon. It's going to be more and more of a factor as we move forward.
Does your concern extend to water supply? While we start to recover and our reservoir levels start to come back up, I actually know in the Hudson Valley, because of the aqueduct project and New York City tapping into some of those, we are way down. I mean, and it's more visually startling than it normally would be if they didn't have that project. So are you worried it extends to that, or do you think, listen, rubber band, we're going to get our water supply?
I think we'll get a rebound. I think once we get the Julian oscillation back into phases 8, 1, and 2, we've been kind of stuck in phases 5, and 6 a lot this year, and the late portion of 2024. So I think that we're going to see a rebound. But unfortunately, we also have a lot more people. So that rebound might take a lot more, a lot longer to really be achieved.
Okay. Just in simplified terms, for our viewers that don't know what MJO is, how does that work with our weather?
Well, it's a tropical forcing factor. Okay. So to make it simple, where what we always track is where convection or thunderstorms are setting up in the tropics. And where that sets up, that kind of enhances your subtropical jet stream and increases the potential for stronger disturbances, more moisture transport. So we study the MJO to kind of get an idea of what those climate impacts are going to be. We've been stuck in what essentially has been a dry pattern for us for quite some time. And the forcing just leads to these factors. Now, once we get into phases 7, 8, and 1, that's when we should really start to turn things around.
Okay. All right, let's get head into the teeth of what has been, again, a winter that has nickeled and dimed us. But the fact is, we got our first white Christmas. Great. A little light accumulating snowfall. I know you got 2 inches in Freehold. Congratulations there. Decent storm south of Atlantic City. Pretty impressive. And here we are with some ducks on the pond heading into the upcoming weekend. But once again, sure, I mean, all the players are there, but things might be a little out of sync. How do you feel about it?
Well, first of all, I always say in December, if you get any snow,
Bonus.
that's just golden. That's just perfect. That's what you call bonus snow. Because as much as people like to talk about a white Christmas or white Hanukkah or what have you, that's more Hollywood than reality. You have less than a 10% chance of seeing that. So what you experienced this year was truly magical. Okay. So we have that factor there. And it's interesting because we're seeing plenty of cold air. And I always say if you have cold air available, hey, you got a shot. Okay. Now, we have not been in a favorable tropical forcing mechanism, part of that being the MJO, for quite some time. There's been a lot of screwy stuff going on. First of all, La Nina really did not develop the way that a lot of the models were suggesting. It's a little bit screwy right now in that it had a peak last week at around -1, but now it's starting to decline. So that's been messing with a lot of tropical forcing. So right now, we have been in very unfavorable tropical support. Now we're moving into favorable. Now we're seeing a lot more support for moving into phase 8, 1, 2, and 3. And when you move into those phases in January and February, your potential for a major winter storm exponentially increases. Now, that doesn't guarantee snow in your backyard, but you have to be in the game to at least have a shot. And what I'm saying is that we're going to be moving into the game to support the potential for snowfall
Okay.
throughout the region.
So this storm, which is actually, by the way, the low that contributed to the fire weather in the Southwest, whereas our last snowmaker, even though we may talk about the magnitude of snow in this one being comparable to what we just saw in this light snowfall recently, this is a totally different system. You have the main piece instead of an I-70 track, more of an I-20 track, and then we're looking at another piece in the northern branch. So the question is a situation where we're looking at a storm that's going to be way more impactful well to the south, across the southeast. But this northern branch, maybe we can see almost kind of two maxes. Maybe the northern branch is able to bring some snows well north and west. It's Catskills, Hudson Valley. You get another enhancement down to our south. Are we stuck in the subsidence zone with just some snow showers? We put down basically some coatings, there are slick spots, and we're done with it. Or am I downplaying it too much?
Well, in this scenario, because the timing's a little off because of the disturbance coming out of the southwest, you're ending up with more of a disjointed, broken forcing mechanisms here. Now, the way that the upper level low comes into the Great Lakes, it leads to a lot of what we call divergence and diffluence. Best way to think about this is that, let's say you have taffy and you're pulling the taffy, the atmosphere is always looking to fill. Okay. It's always looking for a balance. So we're going to be under an optimal area of rising air. But because the subtropical shortwave is delayed, we're not seeing a lot of moisture. So, yeah, we'll see a lot more enhancement of lifting even to our north, but there isn't much moisture to lift.
Right.
So as a result, your best potential for accumulating snowfall is going to be as you head down towards southern New Jersey and the Delmarva Peninsula. It could pick up an inch or two.
Right.
But further northward, yeah, there's stronger lifting, but there's only so much moisture to lift. So you end up with just a dusting, maybe an inch. You could get enhancement in the Poconos and Catskills via some upslope.
That's what
And also some enhancement from the lake effect snow. You can get some enhancement from that. But unfortunately, they're just not playing together just right. The best way to describe this situation is when you're watching ice skating and when you have those pairs and they're trying to make that amazing lift and they're trying to lift that person up in the air. Well, when they're doing that, they're perfectly aligned. They each of them are working and complementing each other's movements. When they don't, it becomes a disaster, and then the German judge throws you out with a 0. That's essentially what is happening here. The disturbances are coming close. They're getting ready to do that pirouette, but they're out of alignment, and so you're thrown out.
I like that better than mine was. Mine was, are they holding hands or are they just doing a quick fist pump and then saying goodbye? So yeah, so we can say it that way. Is this storm giving a little foreshadowing for the remainder of the month? Is our baroclinic zone our more favored storm track or area of storm development? Is that going to be more suppressed where, okay, as you said, the cold air is in place, but the storm track just isn't right yet?
I can't rule out that the rest of the winter features these suppressed storm solutions. The one thing that's different is, again, we're moving into a more favorable tropical forcing phase, so that could put our shortwaves better into alignment. In fact, today's European model guidance is starting to show that potential already.
Not in January,
again,
right?
Yeah, I mean, it produced a nice little moderate to heavy snowfall for the region around the 20th
Okay.
of
So,
the month.
all right.
So there is that potential. I don't like to make any, I always say I don't like to make guarantees, but I definitely think we're moving into a more favorable period from basically after this weekend on through, I would say about mid-February for winter storms and for a lot of activity. So we're definitely going to be on our toes, and I have just bought more coffee because I think I'm going to need it. So put it that way.
I finally put my snows on the car, so yeah, no, I'm feeling it too. Little discussion about the polar vortex. Obviously a buzzword now, especially with our viewership. There was actually a little bit of debate. Is this most recent, outbreak? Is it the polar vortex? I would suggest, is it a modified piece that broke off of the polar vortex? Yes, this is not, a full polar vortex is relocated into the northeast. Do we see any more of that, or is it more of a weaker polar vortex? The cold pattern is locked in, but it's supplying us with a steady shot of these. They're a little transient, but they're coming.
This is going to be an interesting year with the polar vortex. A lot of people think of it as this big whirling cyclone that just drops down from the Arctic.
Right.
There's literally three pieces involved here. The first one is the stratospheric polar vortex, which we study quite a bit, and that's stretching quite a bit. When that stretches this year, that allows and opens up the potential for cold air to drop into North America.
Mhm.
It has to stretch towards North America.
Right.
If it stretches towards Europe, Europe gets cold. If it stretches towards China and Russia, they get cold. So this year, with what we call a positive QBO, that's positive quasi-biennial oscillation. That's where the winds are moving west, so they're enhancing the polar vortex. That strengthens the polar vortex. So you don't get cold air dropping in unless the polar vortex stretches towards us. So that's exactly what's been happening this year. Kind of a little bit lucky or unlucky, depending on how you see it. Now, when you get into the troposphere where we're at, okay, that's where we live, you can get these little lobes that break off within the tropospheric polar vortex that's up in the North Pole. And when you get that and you get a little bit of mixing from the stratosphere, that's where you get your really brutal Arctic air. And we had a piece of that drop in. That's going to retreat.
Peace
Things
looks a
get
little
more.
stronger next week. Late next week, it looks a little.
Yes, next week, yeah. But then we get another surge. And this is going to be a theme. When you have a positive QBL
Mhm.
and you have a stretched polar vortex, you're going to get a lot of these transient polar and Arctic air masses. This year, because of the way that the polar vortex is oriented, we're getting the sustained polar air, but then you get these Arctic shots that come in and they're not modifying because the cold air is already in place. So now they're even more brutal. And then you add in snowpack, you can really start to set up a really, really brutal Arctic air mass that can knock your temperatures down into the single digits. You throw in the strong winds, and well, it's not going to be very fun being outside. That is for sure.
Okay. All right. Something I want to talk to you about. One of the reasons why we started Whether or Not was to debunk any far-fetched fantasy forecast long range. And that happens a lot in the era of social media, where big map totals, big snow totals are put out on maps and disseminated. And unfortunately, there's a lot of desire for short-term gain over long-term pain, which I think overall has hurt the profession, unfortunately. And I wanted to get your feel, Stephen, about this trend, how we counteract it. I'm trying to do it on any and of all of our platforms, but I think you feel the same way.
Oh, yeah. I have been railing against this for what, like 15 years now. The worst thing that ever happened to meteorology, in my opinion, is the modeled snow map. First of all, it's a crutch. It's a crutch for someone who simply can't multiply 10 or 15. Look at the QPF, understand what is going on. QPF, by the way, is the moisture output that the model produces. And then look at the temperatures, understand what type of environment you are, and then create a forecast. Okay. The snow map is the equivalent of having a constant spotter in the gym that only will lift your weights and then you pretend to lift it. That is what a snow map is. It is a disgrace and it needs to stop being produced, or at the very least being issued out to the public. Now, what you have here is a lot of individuals, and some of them who claim to be meteorologists, which we'll leave that, um, using the wrong data. Look, models are like tools. When you're putting up a picture frame, you don't use a sledgehammer, you use a small hammer, a little tiny one. That way you can put a little hole. You don't want a huge hole in your wall, right? Well, what people are using are large sledgehammers to make inappropriate forecasts. So they're using climate models like the CFS, which is just mind blowing to me, or they're using solutions that are 10 to 15 days out. When you're looking at model guidance 10, 15, even 7 days out, all you're looking for are themes, potential ideas. Yeah, it could be above normal, below normal, not specific forecasts. And when you get under the 7 day period, that's when you can start to at least take a look at what the potential is for a moderate or heavy snowfall. What are the factors that are involved in that pattern so that way you could look at it and then compare that to the observations? This is a long process. If forecasting the weather was as simple as looking at a model data output and then copying and pasting, everyone could do it. Not many people can. That's why we're kind of special, you and me, because we could take a look at this data and then look at the overall atmosphere and then in our minds, develop a forecast based on the data and based on what we know and what we've experienced. In a way, forecasting is kind of like an art because you have to just take the hard data and what we know and also look at the atmosphere, like the water vapor satellite picture, the radar, pressure falls, all this stuff to create a forecast that's reasonable. Now, we're not always going to be right, but I tell you one thing, the reason why people like you and me do not put out snow maps 10 to 15 days out is because we know better. And anyone that does, frankly, they're not worth your time. They're just trying to scare you. You're worth more than to be scared. You should want something that's reliable. So if you see someone posting a map of a snowfall 7, 10, 15 days out, that's how you know not to follow them. Or you can simply look for a CDM or CBM on their platform, whether that be social media or their own website. And I'll also tell you, hey, look, this person knows what they're talking about because they're certified. That's the best way to do it. Now, look, there's some people that, they want to look at fantasy stuff because that's what they're into.
Right.
That's fine. That's their choice. We can't make people understand what is reliable data. But at the end of the day, don't get upset with me when you start following someone who promised you snowfall up to 15 inches 10 days ago and then come to my website and then complain that you didn't get your 10 inches of snow. That's your problem, buddy, not mine.
Well, I want you to add one other thing to your resume, and that's a meteorological therapist, because now you've released some of my angst about it. The problem is that listen, it's very articulate. I'm 100% on board with what you said. The problem is the damage it does to our message because it's out ahead of us trying to temper that. So like we're just, we sound like we're rolling things back when we never had that in the beginning. So it is a real challenge, but we can't stop speaking out about it and just giving our best accurate forecasts, which you are elite at. And I really appreciate you joining us as always. Stephen DiMartino, MYNJPA Weather, CDM meteorologist, and soon to be CDM chairman, yes?
Yep, in 2026.
Fantastic. Thanks so much for joining us. I hope I can call on you throughout the rest of the winter. I hope we have some exciting stuff. And like you said, you need the coffee. I do too. I'm excited about it.
Absolutely. It's good to see you and looking forward to the future.
Thank you, sir. All right, this is the latest edition of Whether or Not. We thank you for listening to us. Of course, we'll keep you posted on all the upcoming systems, the fire situation out west. You can always get your daily updates on Whether or Not. We'll, of course, push those alerts out. Make sure you subscribe. And we appreciate you always, listening to our forecasts, and hopefully we're helping you out on a day-to-day basis and giving you a feel for how things are going to evolve for the rest of the season. So be safe with this next one. Layer up the next couple of days here. Obviously, we're getting less harsh as we go into late week with the wind shutting off, and then we have our light snow event later Friday night into Saturday. We'll have a little reprieve with the brutal temperatures into early next week before that next Arctic blast. All right, take care, everyone. That's this edition of Whether or Not. We'll see you next time, snow, rain, or shine.